Export to the cloud. All right. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Flock. I am a partner with Creative Leadership Solutions, and it is my privilege to be here today with a panel of my colleagues. Do a quick introduction of Dr. Douglas Reeves before we get going. Out the session, please don't hesitate to send your questions in via chat for our panel regarding anything and all things SEL. I'll be monitoring that chat and serving as your facilitator to make sure that those questions are seen. As soon as I introduce Dr. Douglas Reeves, I will turn my camera off and go on mute, but please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions that you've got or questions for our panel. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce the man who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway, Dr. Douglas Reeves, who's the founder of our organization, Creative Leadership Solutions. He's been consulting in all 50 states and 25 countries, and really describes our mission as 3 words: evidence, passion, and results. So with that in mind, Doug.
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks, Tony. It's a great pleasure to be with you. We know that we have colleagues, for example, in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast who are really struggling right now, as well as throughout the world. People are coming back to school with some degree of enthusiasm, but also a good degree of weariness and trepidation. So I know all of you listening to this care deeply about our children, as do we. But our mission this afternoon is to ask you to take a moment and care about yourselves. Self-care is necessary, because if we don't engage in that, then our kids are going to be the losers. So I know you're all heroes. I know you all want to do the best thing, but today's mission is to not sacrifice yourselves lest we have our children not get the support that they need. I'm joined by 3 wonderful colleagues, and I'll introduce them briefly and then ask them to respond, first of all, to why this message of self-care is so important in an environment in which social and emotional learning is critical. Dr. Kate Anderson Foley has been a national leader with respect to special education, as well as meeting the needs of individual students. A special educator by training. She's been the Associate Commissioner for Special Education at the state level and lectures widely, both locally and nationally. Dr. Pam Van Horn has had responsibilities at the state of Ohio level, as well as an experienced administrator at every level. And Dr. Rachel George has a distinguished career as an educator and leader, widely recognized not only within the state of Oregon, but throughout the United States for her success as a school principal and now as a district leader. So let me begin, Kate, with you, and tell us why it is that we really need to elevate the primacy of self-care, particularly at a time when many of our students are coming to us not on grade level.
First and foremost, I would say to picture in your mind students and adults coming back with invisible backpacks. And in those invisible backpacks are the things that happened for the past couple of years for the pandemic. And now we're coming back with Delta. We're coming back in person, simultaneous learning, all kinds. In addition to that, we recently have, fires, we have floods, we have all the things that have disrupted. And I like to use this analogy that when you're on the plane and the flight attendant says, when the oxygen ends, and it pulls down, take care of yourself first. That way you can best take care of everybody else. And that's what self-care is. It's looking at it from a strength-based perspective of this is how we take care of ourselves so we can turn and be the best for our students.
Pam, I'm curious about your experience, because you've served a wide variety of systems, including urban systems, suburban, and deeply rural systems. What advice do you give to people who maybe, for example, a singleton? I'm the only principal in the area. I'm the only teacher in this particular area, and they can feel very isolated.
Doug, that's a great question. The isolation occurs no matter where you are, even if you're the only single principal or single grade level teacher in a building. Even in the larger districts, the large urban districts, there is a real feeling of isolation. And you feel as a principal that you need to solve everyone's problems. And when you put yourself out there to solve everyone else's problems and be there for everybody else, the deficit that you leave for yourself to have that energy and that focus and that strength and that ability to be able to continue that over time becomes the issue. So I think the self-help piece is, if you take care of yourself, then you have the strength, the energy, the focus that you need to support your teachers and your families. And hopefully your teachers being well supported by SEL strategies as a leader in the building, then they model that and use that with their students, because certainly the students are coming back with all kinds of different spaces where they've evolved over the last 2 years with COVID.
Thank you. And Rachel, your experience includes serving students in very high poverty areas, and not just once, but several times. You've really led turnaround strategies. What are some of the additional complexities, not just about the shutdown and COVID and all those related issues, but just about the influence of poverty that has affected our students well before COVID set in? How are you coping with that?
$1,000,000 question. It truly is. I think that educators are just so caring and giving. And when you're working in a high poverty location, school setting, whatever that might be, you give your heart and soul. I mean, there's a reason that you're doing the work where you're doing the work at. And we have to remember to take care of ourselves. So this topic really hits home when it comes to my family. My mom was an elementary principal and she was a complete workaholic, but let me tell you, she kicked the can down the road when it came to self-care. And the last couple of years before she retired, she had millions of things breaking on her. And that's something that I think is, we're in this current setting and situation with COVID-19. Many of us in March of 2020 thought we're going home for 2 weeks, and this is going to be over. 2 weeks turned into the rest of the school year. It turned into last school year. And now I'm hearing with Delta, we just got to get through the end of September. And I'm significantly concerned for many of us that put our heart and souls into really doing what's right for kids, that we're really sacrificing ourselves. And it needs to be a balance to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves emotionally, mentally, and physically. So then that way we can keep serving the students that really truly need us the most.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed is, with good intent, I've heard some school administrators say, well, we really want to focus on social and emotional learning, as if the learning was not part of SEL. And so they'll say, well, we're not going to do any assessments. We're not going to worry so much about curriculum and assessment. We just want to make sure we care about the children as individual. And my rejoinder to that is, isn't caring about them as a learner, as somebody who has agency, part of SEL? I'm curious what your reactions to that have been.
I'll go ahead and get started. I too have heard the same comments, and I respectfully ask the question, do we not see that SEL, strong and strength-based SEL practices, are the actual foundation so you can start to get to the academics? And as my colleagues just talked about, you know, with learning loss, the pandemic, the ongoing, et cetera, it's even more important that we know who our students are coming back into our schools. And that's done through, it can be a quick assessment, but we need to have that pulse of where they are so we know how to remedy it. But I'd also say we also need to know where our staff are, because they too are experiencing the same things that students are.
You know, Kate, I think it's very interesting that you use the term learning loss, because there's, as you know, a large body of controversy in the public sphere about whether or not that term should even be used. And, you know, don't talk about learning loss, you know, let's just talk about acceleration. Mm-hmm. But the evidence is overwhelming, whether it's the latest report from a number of international resources as well as to local resources. The truth is, depending on who you want to believe, 4, 6, 9 months of learning, if not lost, it's hiding very, very well. So how do we address this issue of the fact that we've got third graders who can't read? We've got fifth graders learning reading on a third grade level. How should we address those things? Pam, let me start with you.
You know, I am going to piggyback off of what Kate started to talk about. I think that there are some SEL strategies that are also instructional strategies. And the instructional strategies that have that strong SEL component allow you to begin to do what should be the primary focus of what we do in our schools, which is allow students to grow and learn and be able to get to a point where they're able to perform at a level with satisfactory skills to be able to make choices for the rest of their lives. And so I would say that, to me, marrying SEL skills with strategies. And a lot of those will come from the special education high leverage strategy world that can be used in all classrooms. And making sure that students feel they are included, that they're valued, that they're part of the team, and that when you're engaging in instruction, there's nobody falling off the instructional wagon and being left behind. So I think really strategizing as teaching teams to be able to choose those specific instructional strategies that combine SEL and the instruction that students need are going to be, I would say, the most efficient and effective way to move through where we are right now.
And Pam, I really want to pick up on what you said about the value of special education, applying to all students. I worry sometimes that when a student is struggling with literacy or any other area, the default is to say, not let's give them more time, let's give them more space, let's give them more instruction, but the default is let's put them over in special education. And a lot of what's happening now are really not special education needs. It is just the need to learn. Now, we've been focusing on our students. Rachel, what I want to ask you is about the faculty. You've led faculties in different situations. And what if I'm the third grade teacher and I just do not feel prepared? I'm committed to my profession. I want to do the best, but I'm having kids come into my classroom who haven't been there for 18 months, and some of them literally don't know their letters. And that's not what I'm equipped to teach, nor what my pacing guides say as a third grade teacher. Help me out of that quandary.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And that's the exact conversation that we've been having in our district for the last couple of weeks. So that's spot on. You know, I think that there's a need to be flexible, right? And take kids where they're at, use a strength-based approach, and also collaborate with your colleagues. So maybe you're a third grade teacher and phonics has not been your instructional mode that you've been using. This is a great opportunity for you to partner in team and learn some stuff from kinder and first grade. It's definitely going to be a moment where you need to be a little bit vulnerable and open to new ideas and suggestions, but this is definitely where we're needing to rethink. This also can play into how you're looking at the master schedule for some collaborative grade level times for them to plan, or also to be able to flex your grouping pieces. Now, I also want to hit on, this can be kind of stressful internally, right? For teachers and educators when we're used to being really super good at what we're doing. And now it's outside of my comfort zone. So as a leader, we have to be really, really cognizant about where our staff are at and making sure that we're pushing and pulling at the right times, because if we completely overwhelm, they're going to crack, they're not going to be effective, and that's not good for kids. So being supportive, explicitly asking how we can help, what support and professional development they need to really wrap around what teachers need in order to be successful.
You know, Rachel, you're making me think of Lisa Elliott, who's a superintendent in Wisconsin, who said, we're all first-year teachers now. I mean, all of us, I don't care if we've got 30 years in the classroom, are facing new challenges, and we've got to be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to ask for help, not just about technology, but on some of the content and skills that we may not have been used to teaching. I wonder if any of you have seen some very specific leadership actions to make time and space during the classroom day to give students and teachers what they need. What have you found to be most successful?
So when I've worked with school districts and building leaders, they have actually just what you said, they carved it out. They created that space, be it in the beginning of the day where they gather, they support each other. They have an accountability buddy. They use a variety of tools such as music, little apps on their phone. It's amazing how many staff members use apps as a way to de-stress, calm, disconnect. So even though it sounds like it's an opposite, right? You're using technology when you're supposed to disconnect, but in fact, that is precisely what's going on. And so they're creating those healthy habits, and the principal or whoever the leader is supporting that, but also recognizes it, not as something of being off task or anything else. They're doing something, they're advocating for themselves. They're taking that oxygen mask and putting it on for themselves, because it positively impacts students.
You said something that I think we really need to key in on, and that is I worry sometimes when SEL is like a part of the curriculum, like in the old days, character education will be. So between 2:45 and 3:15 will be of good character, to heck with the rest of the day.
Right.
And we'll care about your social and emotional learning and your self-care for the following 15 minutes, then it's back to the grindstone. we need to think of how we integrate these self-care ideas throughout the entire day. And Pam, I'm wondering if you've seen things that both administrators and teachers can do, not as an event, but rather as something that's just habitual throughout the day.
Yeah, actually, working with the district last year in New Jersey, there were a number of principals who I worked with to try to get them to figure out what their teachers' needs were. And what I mean by that is that you can't just think by doing something that is in a social emotional realm that that's going to meet each teacher's needs. And what I asked them to do is I asked them to do a short survey of what teachers felt they needed to come back into this is at the end of last year, to come back into the school setting. What would they need from the administrator to be able to give them the support and the comfort and the safe space and the risk-taking encouragement that they would need to be able to return from this past year of remote learning. And so one of the principals I was working with did that. And then she made a spreadsheet, if you will, for herself. I mean, just because that was her nature to organize that way. And she knew that what Doug needed was for her to stop by her room in the morning before the students were in the building and check in and see if you were okay. She knew that Kate down the hall didn't need that. She knew that Kate needed her to be able to review some things that she was doing in her classroom with her students for feedback on instruction. So what I think is the ongoing piece is for you to really understand the needs of your staff members and to tailor your interactions with them to meet their needs. The return piece is that if you can do that, then you've got a staff that's going to be extremely supportive of you as an administrator, which will also help you meet your needs as the leader in the building.
That's so interesting to hear you say that, Pam. We talk a lot about differentiated instruction, but not very much about differentiated leadership and understanding the needs of how people need to be responded to, how they prefer to be recognized, how they prefer to be addressed or not addressed during meetings. That really is a thoughtful idea that applies to all of us because grownups need SEL as well. One issue that we haven't tackled, Rachel, has to do with the how this plays out between central offices and the buildings. Schools are hierarchical organizations, and the farther away one is from the classroom, the less easy it might be to understand what the real demands of trauma and of social and emotional needs really are. What advice do you offer to central office people to help cross that chasm?
Yes, and as you were asking, I was laughing because this struggle is real. It really, really is. And working with principals across the nation and just principals in our district, it's real. It's something that is super, super challenging. And so I think one of the pieces that I use to really ground myself is to make sure that I'm present in buildings, that I'm connecting with the principals on a daily basis, that I'm asking how they're doing, I'm interacting with students, and our superintendent models that from the top down. Yesterday was the first day with kids. He was out and about connecting with students, connecting with families, connecting with principals, and not having a hidden agenda, which I think is really, really powerful. And it's also very transparent, and it opens them up to be responsive to staffing needs. I'd also really encourage us to think about our email. And that's like a soapbox that I love to stand on and be really, really loud about. And I'll use my husband as an example. He'll get emails at like 4 a.m. from district office folks or at 11 o'clock at night. And we really, really need to stop doing that to our staff members. Even when we're explicit, like you don't need to respond. Even if you turn notifications off, it's extremely overwhelming and stressful to hop onto your email during your normal work hours and have it had gone from like 0 to 100. It's insane. I think we really need to put some boundaries about when and how we're using it, and also about when we expect people to respond, because it's not feasible to expect someone to respond back in 15 minutes and then I'm going to call you on the landline. Give people time, set some boundaries, be really clear. And then we need to check ourselves. When are we working and how are we impacting others with that piece? Because often it trickles down. So
well, and
I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's fine, Rachel. And I think in my experience, sometimes those wildly weird expectations are self-imposed. I'll have somebody, I'll say, do you really need to respond to a text in 30 seconds? And, oh yeah, I have to because my boss expects it. Well, the
Mhm.
boss is standing 10 feet away. I'll say, ma'am, is that really what you're expecting? And they'll say no. So to have a norm of, not,
Yeah.
certainly within 24 hours, that's responsive. But the
Agreed.
idea that I interrupt observing a class, interrupt a conversation with a colleague, or worst of all, interrupt working with a child to turn
Mhm.
around to see what my device is certainly not what I think most people expect. Honestly,
Agreed.
if it's a crisis, they'll call you. But emails and
Exactly.
text you can do 3 times a day. And I know that's a hard thing to give up, but I'll just give you one data point on this that really supports what Rachel is saying. Knowledge Workers, which is all of us, a 2021 book called A World Without Email, says knowledge workers respond on average to emails every 6 minutes. And the psychic toll that takes is that every time I respond, then I've got to get back into what I was doing. And so it could have been a 20-minute chore, becomes an hour and a half chore because I'm constantly switch tasking back and forth. So thank you for being on the soapbox. We all need to hear that. And for those of you in leadership positions, I would just say use the delay function. That's what I certainly try to do. And if I'm sending emails out on weekends in the dead of night, as I sometimes do, they don't have to receive it right then. They can receive it during the day, the next business day. One of the things, Kate, that I think people really want to know about are specific examples of what self-care looks like. Can you give us some examples from an adult perspective, or for a teacher, administrator, or other staff member? What does it mean when I say engage in self-care that does not involve either a punching bag or alcoholic beverages?
I like to put them into 3 categories. We need to be intentional. So what can we do that's intentional for us? What's deliberate and what's mindful? So within those 3 domains, what's in our control and what's not in our control? Being intentional means, what am I going to choose? What am I going to choose not to do? Your example of email is the perfect one of what I'm choosing not to do, or when I'm going to do something. Deliberate. What actions am I going to take? Be it a walk, be it, I like to use the example of dancing like nobody's watching you. Like, you just have to get it out and you have to do something. What that does is chemically change your brain and it get you in a place that is healthy and more resilient. And then finally, mindfulness, it is not a buzzword that I use lightly. It is the word, it is a foundation for being aware. The more self-aware we are about how we're feeling, be it cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, the more we're in touch with that, the more and better choices we can make about what is in my control, what is not in my control. So a real example for district leaders, for sure, being able to say, here's the must, here are some things that we can let go of for right now. Same thing with building level leadership. Can some of these staff meetings be moved to some other platform? Down to teachers, how can they, and that's our role as leaders, build up the skill set and the competencies for our teachers so they create safe and supportive classrooms, but it's also engaging them. So you're paying attention to that, as well as teaching literature or writing or math or science. So those are the buckets that I like to work with.
Well, so far we've heard some really thoughtful ideas from our panel, but I want to listen to our participants as well. And so Tony is going to put us into breakout rooms for just about 4 minutes of 4 or 5 people each. And the topic for the breakout room is what, in your experience, has been the single best self-care idea that you've either experienced or that you have observed from somebody else. Your best self-care ideas. Take about 4 minutes, and Tony, put us into our rooms, please.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as Doug said, you'll have 4 minutes and you'll receive a 1-minute warning to return. So here we go.
Tony, did you want us to go into breakout rooms as well?
Yes, I'm not certain, honestly, why you're not going, so I'm going to throw you in one.
That's perfect. Thank you.
All right, as soon as I can find you. Why am I not seeing?
I hit not now, but I can see you join breakout room 3. I'm good to go.
There you go. All right.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I think I met with two people, Debbie and Yolanda, and they each had really, really good, thoughtful ideas about self-care. One thing that we hadn't talked about yet in this larger group is people are finding that social media can bring a great amount of stress to their lives. So one of our principals has eliminated that Facebook from their life, and that has been a real plus for them, they shared. And the other principal talked about making deliberate choices about how to spend time. And for school administrators, it is really the struggle. Lunchtime is the lunchtime during the school day is a great time to see all your students and interact with them. It's also a big giant block of time that you're not doing anything else because you're with your students. And so finding that and making that deliberate choice on how to manage that and how to manage how much time you're going to spend in PLC. So for instance, you greet kids in the morning, you go to PLCs, you do your hour and a half, 2 hours at lunch, you go to PLCs, you say goodbye at the end of the day, and your day's over and you haven't got anything off your to-do list done. So making those deliberate choices to find that balance.
That's interesting to hear you say that. Jan in our group, who's from Oakland in Michigan, said you got to put it on the calendar. If you don't put it on the calendar, time for yourself, then it's the last thing that ever gets done. And I think she had a really good insight there. Rachel, what did you hear?
Ironically, that same exact strategy. This was a great tip that was given to one of our participants. I had Andrea, Gloria, and Debbie, and their secret was nobody else sees your calendar, maybe your secretary, but the rest of the school doesn't. So control your calendar, block that time out for you, make yourself the priority, and say no. And I think that was a really great epiphany for me, because sometimes you think everyone knows your calendar, but in reality, they don't. The other pieces that we had shared out, which were great, the gratitude journal in the morning walks, being in nature, and then also listening to music. And Andrea talked about being a crisis leader and really problem solving and prioritizing which pieces needed to be addressed first, and then just being really crystal clear about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that sense of prioritization. I have used the metaphor of the burning building many times when, if the building is on fire and children are inside, we don't need a focus group. We don't need a survey. We don't need anything else. We evacuate the building and we give the children exactly what they need. My friend Ken Williams, he and I were some of the co-authors on the book, Beyond Conversations About Race. And what Ken Williams says is equity is giving students what they need, when they need it, with urgency. And I think that's the way we could start every day. Kate, what did you hear?
I had Patricia from New Jersey, and she talked about how their school started a walking club from New Jersey to California. So they mapped it out and they started to clock their miles. And I thought that was great. The other is she put in place a garden and with chicken and chicken coop, and it was just a great therapeutic way, her words, therapeutic to get in there and start to work. Something that I worked on last year with a district in New Jersey was creating a set list, and we all contributed to that set list, and then it was a shared set list, and people saw themselves, people heard themselves in the music, and it was a way to build community. It was a way that they're not isolated anymore. They're building community. And that's that intentionality that I had mentioned before.
I do want to get into the weeds about the logistics of this, because some of the people on this call, and certainly our friends around the country, are dealing with very large class sizes, 35, 40 students in some cases. So speak to that teacher who says, I want to care about the social and emotional needs of my students, but given the scale of what I'm dealing with, there's just too many. Do any of you have some ideas for that teacher who can be easily overwhelmed to really understand the wide variety of needs that students have when it comes to SEL?
Yeah, I can hop in there. So I would encourage us to perhaps look at SEL in a different light, perhaps SEAL, so SEAL, like the seal that's in the ocean, and that A standing for academics, so social emotional learning and that academics piece, because it's a blend of the two and having really high expectations. And I think as we're coming into a new school year, it's really easy to look at class size or maybe the skill deficit and to scale down our expectations. And now's the time to really hold to the power standards within your grade level and teach that to rigor and to depth of what it really needs to have justice with. And I think then it looks to the instructional strategies that Kate and Pam were talking about. What are some ways that we can increase opportunities to respond, create those community connections within our classroom? And so these leading weeks of the beginning of the school year are a fantastic opportunity to be able to do that. Build the connections with students, the relationships, get to know them, whether you're keeping track on a checklist or on a sheet. I know that sounds and feels maybe a little cold, but it's being intentional and it's getting crystal clear, and also creating an accountability for yourself that you're not always going to the same 10 kids, but you're making that contact with each individual one, finding some cheat sheets to be able to remember what those different connections are about their lives and their personalities. So then you can greet them at the door and have those conversations. And it's also creating the student to student connection, because oftentimes as educators, our answer is to add more staff. And we know based off of Hattie's effect size that class size is not necessarily a super big game changer when it comes to really closing that achievement gap. And so we really need to be building those connections with students, because those students are going to be that peer group that moves from grade level to grade level with them, while the teachers typically stay in their classroom and stay in the grade that they're teaching this year. So teaching some life skills.
Well, Rachel, you said several things that I think are really important to amplify. And one is, some people see the use of assessment as somehow contradictory to SEL. And as you suggest, one of the things that Teresa Amabile at Harvard says is that the best classrooms, the best emotional health happens when people know that they're getting better, a little better every day. So it's not the unit test, but a 2 or 3 minute, flash assessment where I can say, I'm better now than where I was yesterday. And even I'm better at the end of the class than I was at the beginning of the class. That sort of progress is not only great academic training, but also really attends to the emotional needs of students to feel that they have agency, that they're getting better all the time. And you mentioned John Hattie. I just had a conference call with him the night before last. We're working on a book on implementation. And one of the things that we have done is to dig into the medical literature on this, and what's happening around the country with all the federal funds coming in, particularly those of you serving high poverty schools. We appreciate the money, but what it means is one program after another, after another, after another, and teachers are drowning in initiative fatigue. So what John and I are working on is this term that you see in the medical literature called de-implementation. Before you start a new procedure, a new drug, a new surgery, or a new curriculum, before you start that, decide what you're going to de-implement, or everything you try is just going to be surrounded by stress. Pam, tell me some ideas that you could give us as advice to really deal with the teacher who is overwhelmed as we begin a new year with lots of kids and lots of different needs.
One of the things I think that always helps everyone, helps students, teachers, and the culture of the school, is when you build your classroom community so that you have protocols and structures in place within the classroom that are supportive of all students. And then the students then have the ability to be able to support each other. It's not strictly just the teacher's responsibility. If it is the culture of a classroom, if it is the culture of a school, then everyone is supporting this community. It's kind of like, it takes a village to raise a child kind of thing, except it's more intentional and it's more specific. And it's kind of like when you're in a kindergarten classroom and everybody has their little helping hands that they drew and they have in the little box where somebody's going to clean the erasers and somebody's going to wipe off the desks and somebody's going to do that. You do that emotionally with how you run your classroom. And if you can do that, then the responsibility really isn't owned by the teacher. It's owned by every one of the members of the class, including the teacher.
So this is really interesting, Pam, because we do a great job, as you described, at the elementary level. People feel known. They feel that the teacher and their peers understand them. They know about their hobbies. They know about something outside of school. They even have morning meetings to kind of check in. But then we stop doing that in middle school and high school because that's it, because relationships are not important to adolescents. Is that it? I mean, come on, some of the best practices we see are confined to the younger grades, when you and I all know that we need to replicate those for our older students as well.
That's right.
Kate, what have you seen?
Doug, can I take a slightly different turn? I think of self-care and I think of SEL and the whole, endeavor of learning. Think about it like first semester, second semester. And in first semester, especially now, you can get into teachers, parents, but I'm going to focus on teachers right now and staff, leaders, all kinds of staff. You can get what's called like compassion fatigue. So again, we have had 2 years. Now we're into our 3rd year, and we bring into the school what we had for 2 years. And in many cases, it's traumatic. So I don't want to like be a downer, but it's like, it's traumatic. So how do we make sure that we're looking for the signs, being aware of what those needs are, that exhaustion is? Because what that exhaustion does is diminish a teacher or principal or superintendent's ability to empathize and then respond positively. And so I just want to make sure that we're stepping back to say, how can we build in from that natural rhythm of a school district first semester to, we need to heighten what self-care is. And that's why I say intentional, deliberate, mindful, for sure. And then moving into that second semester of how do we, okay, that cadence of, okay, now we're getting into state assessments, and now we're doing this, and now we're doing that. How do we guard against those things? And so looking at strategies very specifically, I think the power is in the group, and the power will create those strategies as well. When you give them, as you mentioned, the agency, we're talking about students and agency, adults have to have the agency as well. And there are things that, because teachers are, first responders in many cases, and teachers are, what Rachel said, helping to the point of exhaustion, we need to, and it's our responsibility to be on the lookout and to build those skills. And one of those great resiliency skills is, practice that mindfulness for sure, but also to set the intentions. And that can be done first semester, second semester. A building principal can do that. A director can do that. A superintendent can do that. A teacher can do that with their students. So while they're making it welcoming. One of the other strategies that I've mentioned before in other districts is a pay it forward day. So even though we're in the midst of all of this, there is something very resilient building when you look out and say, okay, how can we as a school or the district pay it forward? What could we do? Maybe it's a local food bank. Maybe it's something within the school. It could be very tangible, but those are ways, and those are very specific strategies that we can address the need, but also build the skill sets up.
Kate, this is so profoundly important. And in the few minutes we have left, I want to just highlight that. And again, invite our colleagues who are on the line. If you want to ask any questions, please do so in the chat room. But what Kate just said is incredibly important. There are really two things, two forks in the road that we have as we address students. And one is we treat them like victims. Ain't COVID awful? Wasn't being at home terrible? Wasn't technology bad? And treat them as victims there to be felt sorry for. And the other is to treat them as young people with agency. And I've seen some brilliant teachers around the country do some great things where students would say, hey, it's not great being at home, but we can do things like, for example, call on elders who have been very isolated, very alone. They've published, they've created chat lines to get neighborhood news done. They did online art museums. They did online music recitals, all kinds of things that really let students feel a sense of, I'm part of the solution. I'm contributing here. I'm not just a victim. And one of the most important things we can all do is have that students feel a sense of empowerment. The other thing, just to plug the book Fearless Schools for a second, is one of the things that in this new book, Fearless Schools, we highlight is the need for psychological safety. And the hallmark of psychological safety is, can you admit that you need help and not have it be a sign of shame? Can you admit that you made a mistake and not have it be a sign of shame? Because in a fearful classroom, a fearful school, nobody says that they have any problems. Everything's great, everything's wonderful, no help needed here. And we know that that's a lie. In the fearless classroom, the fearless organization, it's okay for students and for adults to ask for help when they need it. Well, we're at 45 minutes, colleagues. I want to just make a couple of offers to you. We really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you like this, but Tony is going to put our contact information in the chat room. This chat that we've had for the last 45 minutes will be available to you. You're welcome to share it with your colleagues. In addition, we have lots of free resources, tools, articles, videos that are short, brief, and focused on a wide variety of teacher needs, all at creativeleadership.net. So if that is helpful for any of you, we hope that you'll take advantage of it. And in addition, please contact us directly. I'm not saying we've got all the answers, but among my colleagues, like the State Farm guy says, we've seen a thing or two. So I hope you'll take advantage of it. I want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Rachel George, Dr. Kate Anderson-Foley, and Dr. Pam Van Horn. Thanks for your insight and your sharing your experiences with all of us. Tony, anything else we need to do before we sign off?
Sorry, I have to get to the unmute button faster. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. If you'll stick around for 1 second, I am finishing the contact information. Lisa Almeida just placed our upcoming list of events, a link to that at our website. If you'd like to contact us with any follow-up questions or to schedule a meeting, there's 2 different email addresses you may contact there, service@creativeleadership.net, or Matt Minnie, our Director of Client Relations, at matt.minnie@creativeleadership.net for specific conversations. Or if you'd like to set up a meeting with any of our panel today, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Rachel, Pam, Kate, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. If you'd like to stick around and ask any individual questions as everyone's logging off, we're going to stop the recording here. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.